Chapter 15 looks at the respiratory system, which provides the body's cells with the means for obtaining oxygen and eliminating carbon dioxide. It works closely with the cardiovascular system, which provides the link between the interstitial fluids and the exchange surface of the lungs. So this chapter begins by following air as it travels from the outside of the body to the alveoli of the lungs. Then we consider the mechanics of breathing, and this chapter also introduces you to the physiology of respiration. The respiratory system has 5 basic functions. It provides a large area for gas exchange between air and circulating blood. It moves air in and out of the gas exchange surfaces, and it protects the respiratory surfaces from dehydration, temperature changes, and from pathogens. It also produces sounds, allowing for speech and other forms of communication, and it aids in the sense of smell by the olfactory receptors in a nasal cavity. The term respiratory tract refers to the passageways that carry air. The major anatomical structures of the respiratory system are the nose, including the nasal cavity and the paranasal sinuses, the pharynx, or the throat, the larynx, or the voice box, the trachea, or the windpipe, the bronchi, and the lungs, which consist of the bronchioles, which are the air-conducting passageways, and the alveoli, which is the gas exchange surfaces. The respiratory tract can be divided into an upper conducting portion and a lower respiratory portion. The conducting portion begins at the entrance to the nasal cavity and continues to the larger bronchioles. The smallest bronchioles and the alveoli, the gas exchange surface, make up the respiratory portion. In addition to delivering air to the respiratory portion, the conducting portion filters, warms, and humidifies air, thereby protecting the alveoli from debris, pathogens, and environmental extremes. The conducting portion is lined with respiratory mucosa made of ciliated columnar epithelium and many mucus cells. Cilia sweep the mucus and any trapped debris toward the pharynx where they can be swallowed. So we've reached the first checkpoint. Go ahead and pause the recording if you like before you move on. So let's take a closer look at these structures that make up the conducting portion of the respiratory tract, starting with the nose. Air enters through the external nares or nostrils into the nasal vestibule of the nasal cavity. The hard palate forms the floor of the nasal cavity, and the soft palate extends behind the hard palate, defining the border of the nasopharynx. Internal nares are openings between the nasal cavity and the nasopharynx. The pharynx is also called the throat. This structure is shared by the respiratory and digestive systems and is lined with stratified squamous epithelium. There are 3 subdivisions of the pharynx noted in this figure: the nasopharynx from the internal nares to the soft palate, the oropharynx from the soft palate to the base of the tongue, and the laryngopharynx from the base of the tongue to the entrance of the esophagus. The larynx is made up of 9 cartilages, ligaments, and skeletal muscle. Air enters the larynx through the opening, the glottis. The epiglottis cartilage projects over the glottis to cover it during swallowing. This prevents entry of liquids and food into the respiratory tract. In addition to the epiglottis cartilage, the thyroid cartilage forms anterior and lateral surfaces of the larynx, and the ridge on the anterior surface is known as the Adam's apple in men. The next largest is the cricoid cartilage, which is a ring of cartilage just inferior to the thyroid cartilage. And these 2 cartilage structures protect the glottis and the entrance to the trachea. Their broad surfaces provide sites for the attachment of important laryngeal muscles and ligaments. The larynx also contains 3 pairs of smaller cartilage, the arytenoid, cuneiform, and corniculate, forming vocal cords that are connected to the thyroid cartilage by ligaments. False cords formed by upper pair of ligaments are rather inelastic and reduce the size of the glottis. But the elastic true vocal cords are formed by the lower pair connected to the thyroid and arytenoid cartilages, and they're involved in sound production. Air passing through the glottis vibrates the vocal cords, which produces sound waves. The pitch of the sound waves is determined by the diameter, length, and tension of the vocal cords. Short, thin strings vibrate rapidly, producing a high-pitched sound. Long, thick strands vibrate more slowly, producing a low-pitched tone. The amount of tension on the vocal cords is controlled by small skeletal muscles that change the position of the arytenoid cartilages, and increased tension raises the pitch, decreased tension lowers the pitch. Further amplification and resonance occur in the pharynx, the oral cavity, nasal cavity, and the paranasal sinuses. Final production of a distinct word further depends on the voluntary movements of the tongue, lips, and cheeks. So still following the path of air through the conducting passages, the trachea runs from the cricoid cartilage to the branches of the primary bronchi. Walls of the trachea are supported by C-shaped tracheal cartilages. The open part of the cartilage faces posteriorly and are connected by a smooth muscle, the trachealis muscle. This muscle is under autonomic nervous system control, and sympathetic stimulation can dilate the trachea. The trachea then branches into right and left primary bronchus. Right primary supplies the right lung, left primary supplies the left lung. The right primary side is larger, and it's at a steeper angle than the left. In each lung, the primary bronchi branch into smaller and smaller airways that form the bronchial tree. The secondary bronchi are the first branch off the primary bronchi. There is one for each lung lobe, so 2 on the left side and 3 on the right side. The tertiary bronchi form 9 to 10 branches in each lung. They supply the bronchiopulmonary segment, pictured here in the brown box. Notice how the cartilage along the bronchial tree also diminish as the size of the passageway decreases. When the diameter of the passageway is about 1 millimeter, the cartilages disappear completely. This is the point of the bronchioles. The walls of the bronchioles are dominated by smooth muscle tissue, whose activity is regulated by the autonomic nervous system. Sympathetic stimulation will result in relaxation and bronchodilation. So that brings us to yet another checkpoint box. So go ahead and pause the recording if you like. The walls of the bronchioles are dominated by smooth muscle tissue, again, like I said, which is regulated by the autonomic nervous system. And the bronchioles continue to branch to terminal bronchioles, which are 0.3 to 0.5 millimeters in diameter, so very, very small. And these then branch into respiratory bronchioles, which lead into alveolar ducts that end at alveolar sacs. So these are chambers that connect to multiple individual alveoli. And as pictured here, everything from the terminal bronchiole down, plus the pulmonary arterioles and venules, are bound in connective tissue partitions that form a lobule. So the alveoli are the gas exchange surface of the lung, and each lung contains about 150 million alveoli. And this gives the lung a very spongy, airy appearance. And the idea here is that we're trying to increase the surface area. In fact, we can increase it to about 140 meters squared. And this surface area is where the gas diffusion is going to be occurring. So this allows for very extensive and rapid diffusion, which is necessary to meet the metabolic needs of such a large organism as the human body. The alveolar epithelium consists mainly of simple squamous epithelium with a special name. It's called pneumonocytes type 1. and they're unusually thin. Roaming alveolar macrophages patrol the epithelium, phagocytizing any particles that have reached the alveolar surfaces. Scattered among the squamous cells are large septal cells, or pneumonocytes type 2, which produce an oily surfactant, which reduces surface tension of the alveoli and keeps the alveoli from collapsing upon themselves. The respiratory membrane is where diffusion of gases takes place very rapidly. And this membrane can be so thin, it's 0.1 to 0.5 micrometers thick. It's only made up of 3 layers: a layer of squamous epithelial cells that line the alveoli, an endothelial cell layer of the adjacent capillary, and a fused basement membrane between the alveolar and endothelial cells. So let's take a step back from the microscopic view and discuss what we can see macroscopically. Each of the 2 lungs has distinct lobes that are separated by deep fissures. The right lung has 3 lobes, a superior, middle, and inferior, and the left lung has 2 lobes, a superior and inferior lobe. The apex of each lung extends up to the base of the neck above the first rib, and the base of the lungs sits on the diaphragm. Costal surfaces rub against the ribs. Mediastinal surface of the left lung has a cardiac notch also. The lungs have a very light and spongy consistency because most of the actual volume of each lung consists of air-filled passageways and alveoli. So an abundance of elastic fibers lines the lungs and provides them with the ability to tolerate large changes in volume. The pleural cavities surround each lung within the thoracic cavity, and pleura is the name of the serous membrane in that pleural cavity. We have visceral pleura that covers the outer surface of the lungs, and we have parietal pleura, which lines the inside of the chest wall and the diaphragm. So the pleural layers are going to be responsible for secreting serous fluid, and the idea here is to reduce friction every time that lung has to change volume. The general term respiration refers to 2 integral processes, external and internal respiration. External respiration includes all the processes involved in the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide between the body's interstitial fluid and the external environment. The purpose being to meet the respiratory demands of all the cells of the body. Internal respiration is the absorption of oxygen and the release of carbon dioxide by those cells. If you'd like to know more about internal respiration, you can look over chapter 17. So 3 integrated steps are involved in external respiration. We have pulmonary ventilation, or breathing, which is just the physical movement of air into and out of the lungs. We have gas diffusion across the respiratory membrane between alveolar air spaces and across capillary walls between the blood and other tissues. And then transport of oxygen and carbon dioxide between the alveolar capillaries and the capillary bed in other tissues. And that brings us to the last checkpoint of this recording.